I guess, yeah, you've probably been just busy with the Kickstarter stuff.
Yeah, trying to get more eyes on it has been tricky. Like the first day rush has kind of slowed, so now I'm like, okay, should I do ads? Who can I get to stream it? All that kind of stuff. I've been doing a few streams. I did a stream yesterday and I was like, I have newfound respect for streamers because I did it for like not even 2 hours and I was like, my throat hurts and I'm tired. It was
Right? It takes a lot out of you.
yeah.
Okay, well, I guess I figure we'll start. We'll do some like bio stuff. So, I mean, if you can just do me a favor and introduce yourself, like if we had never met, how would you introduce yourself to people?
Well, if I was talking to somebody in the gaming sphere, I'd be hi, I'm Matt DeLucas. I am a engineer for been an engineer at a company in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for about 12 years called Shell Games, and then I do some indie stuff on the side as Mattrified Games, which is, representing or what Merfight is for. Um, Big fighting game fan, kind of more in the casual space for sure, but I am still a big fan of the genre. Um, yeah, that's pretty much it about me. Not too
All right.
much.
I'm actually curious, like, yeah, what is your experience with the fighting game community? I mean, you've made Merfight, you've made at least one other fighting game with Battle High. So,
hmm
like, where's your kind of experience with the FGC, either casually or competitively?
It's not super deep. When I was growing up, this is gonna sound silly. Like the arcade scene was pretty much dying by the time I could like drive to an arcade. So I never really like grew up with like a strong one. And then by the time I went to college, I was just too focused on that to like really be like, here's that group I could like
Hmm.
play games with. So like there'd be like a few things I would go to in college, but I was never very like, oh, I go to my locals weekly. Like I never really had that. And like right now, working a full-time job and all that, I still don't really do that. So that I think is like my biggest struggle is I don't have that connection to it as much as I'd like. So I mostly just do a lot of like Twitter engagement and like watching streams and stuff, but I don't really have a strong connection, I think right now is sort of where I'm at. Like I try to, but it's been tough.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it even depending on where you are, it can be hard sometimes to find a local scene that is, that lines up with your schedule, right? So even if it's there and available, it's hard to kind of coordinate. So,
Yeah, I think
but
there is like a small one in Pittsburgh, but I don't really know it very well. I know there's the one college nearby has one, but
all right. Well, so what kind of fighting games and games in general did you play growing up and like when you started getting into the scene?
well, definitely a lot of Street Fighter was like the first one. So, even though I know 5 got a lot of slack, I still enjoyed it for a little bit. And then was really big into like Tekken in the early days and still am to a degree. Soul Calibur, pretty much just like any of the like basics, and then every once in a while like a really rare Super Nintendo fighter I would enjoy.
All
I
right.
remember enjoying the Ramna 1.5. It was fun, just things like
Yeah.
that.
Oh, there were some wild Super Nintendo fighting games.
Definitely, yeah. Power Instinct was another one. Just like the original one was so silly.
For sure. For sure. Okay, so I mean, that's interesting that you I mean, like, obviously, the Soul Calibur and Tekkens of the world are super popular games, so there are definitely ones that you would come across. But I mean, all the fighting games you've made have been 2D fighting games. Am I correct there?
Yeah, I've only done two. Battle High and Merfight have been 2D. I do want to do a 3D one day. Like it's like I already started a prototype for it, but it's gonna take a while probably to get that off the ground.
All right. Okay, well, I guess how did you get into video game development? Like, where did that begin with you?
That began just from playing games when I was younger. It was always that like, oh, I want to make these one day. I want to learn how to do that. Just like drawing level designs and character designs and things like that. And then eventually in high school, I started taking like art classes because I was like, oh, I want to do like character concepting and things like that. And then I learned like, oh, there's this whole, they have whole college programs for game development. So I went to the Art Institute of Pittsburgh, which no longer exists.
Okay.
So that's really fun to write on resumes. But yeah, that's just sort of how it started, just wanting to make them and then doing the research later of like how I can get into that. But then in college, I did a lot of art classes, and then I found I was much better at programming than I was at art, so I kind of stuck in that route instead.
Okay, so it's interesting. I mean, you get into the business for one reason, and you end up pivoting just because that's kind of where your sensibilities lay, right? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Exactly.
All right. So I guess when you moved out of when you finished up school, did you move right into like a game dev house? Did you manage to get a job there, or did you start with your indie stuff?
No, I got an internship, and then for a few months at a place. Actually, they were doing a online browser game engine similar to Unity, but it was all browser based,
Okay.
called Wild Pockets. And then after that wrapped up, I got a job at Shell Games pretty much a few months after that, and I've been there ever since.
All right. Interesting. What is it that you do there?
I'm an engineer at Shell primarily. I do a little bit of design every once in a while, but I'm doing mostly engineering.
Okay. And then you spend some kind of your spare time basically, or some of your off time working on your own independent projects through Mattrified, correct?
Yes, yeah, pretty much. That is how it works.
Okay. And how did that kind of come about? Was it really just like there was this like need to create that wasn't being fulfilled anywhere else, and then you were like, "Oh, I can channel that into this."
Yeah, pretty much. That sounds pretty accurate. Like fortunately they have my employer has a really like open, like, as long as you're not working on something that's like really close to what we're currently doing, we don't really care if you do outside stuff. And I'd done some like fighting game prototypes in Game Maker during college, and I posted them on their website. And then the Battle High team, which was like pretty small at the time, just contacted me. The funny thing is, I didn't realize they had contacted me for like 6 months. So by the time I contacted them back, they were pretty much done with the game. And then I helped them do a few Game Maker related things, uh, and then that's when the Xbox Live Indie Games things was around. So I was like, oh, I can help like port this game to that if you guys are interested, and we can kind of work on that. And then when we did the second game, the sequel for Xbox 360, the team kind of dissolved. Just everyone got too busy, but I was kind of like given quote unquote permission to like. Well, it was not really quote unquote. It was just permission to continue working on it if I wanted. So then I ended up taking it to Xbox One and the Ouya at different times and kind of working on there.
Interesting. So they kind of just handed you the reins.
Yeah.
I mean, so can you give me a little bit of background on Battle High?
Yeah, so it's a 2D fighting game with sort of this elemental rival schools influence theme. So it's sort of in a school, and then every character has like a different element that they control. So it's about like the school is all the students can like control the elements. It's a real simple fighting game. It's it's just the 4-button fighter, and it's the first time I introduced like the whole rush canceling mechanic, so you can dash out of special or like basic attacks and jumping and things like that. So it's obviously it's Guilty Gear had like the Roman cancel first, so it's sort of influenced by that, but it's performed a little differently.
Okay.
Um, and then there's some like weird meter management stuff in it as well. Unlike similar to Merfight has some meter management stuff as well. So you fill the meter to get your super, but if you dash cancel, it drains half of it. But if you already had the meter full, you can still do your super even if you use some of the rush cancel stuff.
Oh, that's interesting. So it kind of like layers in how meter is consumed, right? But it's like
Hmm.
if you have it in a string, and then it can kind of be stacked on top of each other.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's very interesting. And so yeah, so I mean, so the Battle High stuff that was, I mean, you were brought in late in the project, as you said. So
Hmm.
was all of that kind of design space already planned out, and then you did some refinement with it?
A pretty good amount was done. A lot of the character art, for example, was finished, but then I kind of took it in its own direction. When I was porting it to Xbox, I obviously had the team like can like look over it and be like, "Oh, do you like the direction I'm taking it, et cetera, et cetera." But I didn't change it a ton gameplay wise. It was still 4 buttons and things like that. And I think every character still had like a universal overhead and things like that. So
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, that's really interesting. And so obviously there are some through lines from Battle High into Merfight then, as you said, with some of the meter management and some of the systems there. So that's what we're really here to talk about, right? It's about Merfight. So tell me about the Curse of the Arctic Prince.
So the narrative so far is that there is the Arctic King character Ro, and the idea is that he is quote unquote dying and needs to be replaced. And if he's not replaced, then something cataclysmic will happen. And the Prince character, who is one of the playable characters, they're essentially having like visions and nightmares, and like they know they have to take that place. So that's sort of the quote unquote curse aspect. And the other part of that is he's not necessarily the first one that has tried to replace Ro, so that's another part of it. Um, so that's the curse aspect. But the overall idea is, yeah, it's sort of the lore is very still like it's all in my head and I just need to get it down. But I'm like slowly developing that and I'm really close. But the overall idea was that essentially the mer people used to be underwater and then they were forced onto land after another cataclysmic event a long time ago. So this game is sort of taking like, okay, they've been on land for a while and kind of figuring things out. But there's still these like elemental characters that play big parts in the world as well. There's 9 overall, but right now this is just focused on the ice one, so that the hope is that if I continue to develop it and grow and do like seasons or chapters, I can introduce different characters from those elemental areas.
All right, that's really cool. I mean, I love the idea of having. I mean, first of all, like lore and story in fighting games, for as much as it can be dismissed at times, I think is really important for a lot of players. Like you see the attachment players have to the Mortal Kombat storylines and such, right? And it's like that keeps people in and engaged. And it's also great that you can kind of use it as this right, like this bridge, like you said, to other seasons where you're able to introduce new characters and new factions and new features as you go grow and develop the game, right?
Yeah, I think fighting game narrative is kind of strange because I know a big thing is the players create that narrative a lot in bigger games, especially rivalries between players and whatnot. But I feel like the narrative itself needs to kind of be there to help establish a connection between players and the characters. And the hard thing with making any game really, but especially like an indie fighting game, it's really hard to get that initial connection with players. So you kind of have to just be patient and do it kind of slowly, I feel. Um, and I think lore and the way you deliver it is like a big part of that, of how to make that connection.
Yeah, I mean it is very tough. The fighting game space is extremely competitive. I mean, not only the games themselves, but just like the fight for attention and the fight for mind share amongst players, right? It's a niche genre, and I mean, indie games are a niche within that. So that's interesting that that's kind of one of your main, like that's one of the ways to attract players. I mean, what are some of the other challenges that you've come across in developing a niche fighting game in a niche genre?
There's a lot. I wrote something a few weeks ago about it. Essentially, just feels like there's just a bunch of uphill battles, and like the first one is like you're up against competition that's like really old and really big right off the bat, and there's this social interaction that you don't get when you're an indie right away because you're just trying to find people. So people talk about dead games, and then sometimes it feels like for an indie fighter it's like dead on arrival pretty much because you don't have that audience, and it's really hard to you have players being like, why should I stop playing Street Fighter or my other main game to just play this like small indie game with like nobody else playing it right away. And that can be kind of difficult to overcome. And I think that's one of those things you just kind of have to be patient with and build an audience with over time. I mean, I don't think it's going to be like, oh, I release Merfight and overnight it has like 1 million players. Like that's just not going to happen. That's going to be really difficult unless like there's always like those like rare like viral miracles like, oh, this streamer played it and now it got really big. But that's again, that's very rare. So that's one of them. And I also think there's like a lot of little small ones. Like I'm doing a 3D fighting game or 2.5D or whatever. I find people find that less attractive than 2D. Like if I were to do it a pixel game, but I don't have the skill set to do a full pixel art game like that for Merfight. So 3D is more in my wheelhouse. That is what I'm sticking with. And then the theme itself is just kind of strange. I wanted to do the fantasy underwater mer theme. Just something I enjoy, and I feel like there's a lot of games already that do the like modern realism sort of like scientific fantasy, like King of Fighters and Street Fighter and Tekken. They're all very like similar in that vein, so I wanted to do something different. But I also know there's probably some people that are like, I'm not really feeling this theme. I'm not attracted to it. And also, it doesn't have an IP connection. That's another big challenge. Like you see a lot of games are like, I think I always say like I feel like Dragon Ball Fighter Z is one that like it wouldn't probably have blown up to the extent that it did if it wasn't the Dragon Ball IP. It probably would have just been like, okay, like if it was an original IP, it probably would have still gotten noticed because it was an Arxis game, but not to the extent.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a layered thing where like you have not only the IP of the game itself, but the creators, right? Even the publishers. You see stuff, even like you see Axis attached to it, and you're like, hey, Axis has published a bunch of fighting games. You see Arxis, it's like, hey, they've developed a ton, that they've got this great pedigree, right? And it's definitely tough when you have a limited mind share, like there's limited bandwidth for people to be able to play fighting games, right? They're complex beasts. So that's definitely an interesting issue. And then also being an indie team, you're extremely small. I mean, you're pretty much a solo dev, and then you bring on contractors to help with various parts of the game.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, I'm always hesitant to say like, oh, I'm a solo dev because I feel like it discredits the people I've worked with. But I would say like, yeah, I mean, pretty much I'm doing it by myself, which is kind of hard too, also for a fighting game because it's like it's a 2-player game and you're doing it all by yourself. So that's always seems a little that has its challenges for sure.
Absolutely. So, excuse me. So yeah, you've like being a small team though, being basically a solo dev, you can really drive you can really drive the design philosophy of the game, right? So what would you say your design philosophy is for Merfight?
So the design philosophy I'd say is that's a tough one. Because I think I was going for something approachable but yet fun and different. And by different I mean sort of more in the theming than anything. And just doing small little things that I don't see done often. Like I know that a lot of the mechanics and concepts have been done in other games, but ones that I just don't see done a ton lately. But I think the approachable thing is sort of the main one. I don't accessible is kind of a not a dirty word. I just think it's kind of gotten overused lately, and it means so many things in development. It can mean colorblind, accessibility, language, font size. There's just so many things. So I kind of feel the thing I try to do with Merfight is what I call pick up and playability. Like, can someone who just like has never played the genre or just doesn't play games a lot pick it up and have some level of success? I don't want to like. I know there's a lot of complaints in the genre of like, oh, they dumbed this down, and it's like, oh, now anyone can do it. And it's like, I'm not even the best. No one's gonna pick up. No matter how accessible I make it, someone with good fundamentals is still probably gonna win at the end of the day. Um, so that's sort of what I was going with that. But I think the overall for Merfight, it's just approachability and then just kind of being something a little different is all I'm really going for in terms of my design philosophy.
And I mean, I think those are very valuable goals, right? I mean, I really appreciate approachable design and accessible design. I mean, like the accessibility stuff, I like to differentiate it that accessibility is this allows you to actually physically play and interact with the game, well as the approachability stuff is it's the more lenient inputs, it's the one button specials, or more generous cancel windows, or buffer inputs, or sorry, input buffers. So for Merfight, you've actually done something really interesting with the input systems. I'm curious about like some of the mechanics involved in making an approachable fighting game, right? Like you've tried to use lenient inputs where you can just use directional and an attack to do specials, or you can use the full special attack. What was the kind of inspiration for that?
So the inspiration for that was I wanted a while ago. I wrote an article about like accessibility in fighting games, and it got a little misinterpreted. The whole thing really was that like they're not really well taught in game, and that's part of the challenge. And not like tons of fighting games have tutorials. I meant more just like people don't describe like how to just simply input things really well. So what I wanted to do um, with this is I was like, well, what if there was a game that just let you kind of get away with both? That like, yeah, if you try to do the traditional input and you just don't do it quite right, but you get like the last part right, it just still triggers and sets off. So that's sort of what I was going with that sort of quote unquote lenient input system. Is that it allows people to try to learn. Like, yeah, you want to do the traditional ones because you'll get extra meter and a bonus for it, but you don't have to do that. You could just do like the simple one. Uh, that's sort of what I was going for that. Something so as a way, it's like kind of like a learning, like a way to ease yourself into those learning those motions for other games that require them.
All right, I like that. That's an excellent like training tool built into the input system.
Exactly.
All right, well, I mean, so that helps players kind of get into the game, but there's a lot in Merfight that is on offer for players who want to go much more technical, much more. There's definitely some difficult input stuff, and there's a lot of layered systems. So, what are some of those other systems that you've introduced in Merfight?
So there's the whole pop system, which is essentially just similar to Battle High's Rush Cancel. It's almost identical, except for there's a few more directions to it. But essentially, just lets you cancel like any attack into just like a simple dash or a simple jump, and then continue attacking to extend combos. And then there's this whole wipeout meter. Because one thing I really dislike in fighting games, and also think is a detriment to newer players, is when you get stuck in a long combo and you're just kind of waiting and there's not really much you can do. And like, yeah, some games have burst and things like that. So I have this sort of wipeout meter, I'm calling it, that like when it fills during a combo, you just get knocked out of the combo. But then you can use the pop cancels to kind of reset it and do other things. And that whole system is kind of to prevent the like 15, 20, 30-second long combos that still don't kill, but you're just kind of waiting for them to be finished. Um, is overall the goal with that. And then there's also the meter management. So you get these little pop icons that fill, but you don't fill them unless you do 1/3 of your full meter. So if your meter is full, but you don't have any more of those pops, you won't earn anymore until you use some meter and then refill it. Let me think. And then there is sort of a guard cancel thing too. Now that's actually I just added that because the old guard cancel system was confusing in terms of how you inputted it and what direction you would go. So now this one uses just one input, and then you can kind of choose which way you want to roll after, or not roll at all.
All right, because like that, yeah, that is a lot of options for players. And I love the way that all of these tools kind of interact with the meter system, right? Where like you can't earn more pop cancels if you have full resources, so it encourages you to use your resources more and do more varied stuff. It introduces some different like swings in the pace of gameplay. I think it's a really interesting idea that you might not necessarily see if you look at the game and you're like, hey, it's a 4-button fighter with lenient inputs. A lot of people see that and say, no, no, not my thing, right? And
Yeah,
it's like, but it's all there, right?
yeah.
So
I'd
what?
like. Oh,
Oh no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, yeah. I like to think. On the surface, I definitely feel that is definitely probably a first impression a lot of people have, but it's. I hope people at least give it a try and see that it can be a little more than that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, was there anything else you wanted to kind of go over? I mean, like, there's you've talked about the story of Merfight and how that kind of be a draw, right? Like, you've done a bunch of the art yourself, but then you have some new character stage artists coming in. So you got some lovely new background art, and you've got some lovely music in there. Did you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, the soundtrack is pretty much done, which I'm happy with. I've worked with a variety of musicians for that. That was an enjoyable experience. That's the one thing in indie. It feels like in indie games that musicians are a great resource and probably one of the more um, bountiful resources. I feel like there's a lot of talented composers out there who are just like ready to work on indie games. 3D artists are a little tougher, but yeah, I found a 3D artist who's been helping. They kind of had to step back a little bit recently, but they also like kind of taught me like, oh, here's some tools and things you can do. So like, actually, the latest stage, Strike's stage, that's in the latest version, I actually did myself. But I used some of the tools and concepts that the original 3D artist was using. And then I've just been working with some 2D artists to do like character art for character select and like the title screen and things like that. So that's been the group of people I've been working with. And and obviously the hope is if the Kickstarter gets funded is to work with some voiceover actors. I'm working with actually Stephen Hunt or Stephen W. Hunt, he did a lot of the voice acting in Battle High 1 and 2, and he's going to be helping voice cast and direct the voiceover work for Merfight. So that will probably start with open auditions sometime October, November after the Kickstarter if it's funded.
All right. I mean, I guess that's a great segue. So the Kickstarter Merfight, this is where you're going with. I mean, it's tough. Like, indie game dev is tough. It's expensive. It takes a long time, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you need to be able to support that. And you've decided to go the Kickstarter route for Merfight. Some other devs go for, they just shop the demo around to publishers, or they might use Indiegogo or try to fund it through Patreon. Why did you choose Kickstarter for this Merfight project?
Well, I definitely didn't want to go the publisher route. I think Merfight is sort of my first like original thing because like Battle High, it was like already sort of not entirely mine. So I wanted to do something 100% mine. And I didn't really. I started doing it. I had like 5 characters, and I was showing it off at shows or a local show, and then COVID happened. And normally, what I would have probably done is like, okay, I'm gonna focus on my small cast of 4 or 5, really polish them, get like a really nice vertical slice, and kind of shop that around. But during the pandemic, I was like, you know what, in my spare time while being in my apartment all the time, I'm going to work on the concepts and the aspects that I enjoy the most, and that was the character development. So I ended up just like filling out my cast. But the problem now is like there's a lot of like long-term polish that's going to take, and I have to do it for all 12 characters now, and that's going to be a challenge. So I felt like the publisher route wasn't going to really work because it's probably every publisher I'd show would be like, oh, this isn't really like the polish level we'd want to see in like a 4-character demo. And that's probably the biggest challenge with the Kickstarter as well, is just sort of like, yeah, there's a lot there, but there's also a lot of polish that's needed. And I'm confident I can do that polish. It's just this sort of demo that I put out with like all 12 characters now is sort of where I'm going with it. And then in terms of Kickstarter versus Indiegogo, that was just kind of a coin toss. I just feel like I saw more people have success at Kickstarter, so I just wanted to try that one. But because it's my first Kickstarter, that's why I'm just focusing on the VO. I'm not doing the like, because I know like there's other Kickstarters that are like, oh, fund the whole thing for like 20, 30, 40K. And I feel like I'm at a point where I'm like, yeah, I could finish this without that much funding. It's just this sort of final VO lump sum is really what I want to fund. And that's why that Kickstarter is focused on that.
Okay, yeah, that's really interesting because I was going to ask. I mean, first of all, yeah, Merfight is fairly feature complete, it seems, right? And then it's a matter of like fine tuning a lot of that stuff. And then yeah, you see a lot of these funding campaigns go super huge. I mean, if you're going to fund the entirety of a project, you're looking at, at least into the tens of thousands, more likely hundreds of thousands of dollars in order to properly fund such a complete development. So yeah, it was very much a conscious choice on your part to go very tailored in terms of what you want to accomplish with the Kickstarter.
Yeah. Yeah, because I was just at it for, and also it was my first. It's my first one, so I was like, I'd rather go for something small and what I feel is achievable than just make like my first one super big and it not really go anywhere. Um, yeah, that's sort of what I was looking for that.
Okay. And then what are you looking to get specifically out of this? You said it was a lot of is the voiceover work in particular, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, what are your thoughts on like what's required out of voiceover work? Like why is that so important to
Um,
really get?
I think it helps give like a voice to the characters and makes them more alive than just if they're completely silent all the time. Uh, I mean, audio is such a. It feels like audio is a really neglected part of game development sometimes, and even the audio in Merfight is definitely something that needs a lot of work and mostly just needs a lot of implementation. But in general, I think getting that VO in there will make the characters feel more alive and help make their personalities more stand out more than they are right now. Because I think that's the biggest thing is like, okay, I have these characters and they might look interesting, but you don't really know much about them. Obviously, some more animations like wind pose animations will help with that also, and the story mode stuff. But I think the VO is sort of like one of the biggest things that will help. Does this character have a deep voice, a high voice? Are they like peppy? Are they very tired sounding? Like that, I think gives a lot of personality to a character that a lot of people might overlook. But they notice if there's nothing there, but they don't really think about it too. Like subconsciously, they notice it when it's there.
All right, yeah, and I mean, you've obviously done some thinking about this, right? I mean, you've put a lot of thought into the lore and the story of Merfight and kind of the characterization of the world and obviously the characters. There are like a bunch of win quotes in the game, so you probably have a sense of where you want to take these characters. I mean, what are you most excited about in terms of seeing the voiceover stuff get completed?
Uh, the I think mostly just hearing just hearing it in action. I think is what I really want, and I want to do. I know like one thing in Battle High had that very like character saying thing like every attack, and we kind of want to go a little more subtle with Merfight, where they're not saying their move names like every single attack. But the hope is to just bring the characters to life more in a way that win quotes and story mode stuff can't quite do.
All right. And so, what are your hopes for Merfight post Kickstarter?
So post Kickstarter, the hope is to just I want to do early access on Steam like early 2022. And the hope with that is to get more like gameplay specific feedback. And then, but most of all, during that final year of development, is to just focus on the story mode content and polish mostly. Just get those two like main things done. And then polish includes like doing all the audio, getting the voice work in, possibly updating and changing the shader to make the characters look different and all the environment art. Like there's a lot to do, but it's sort of this like I was able to get all 12 characters done in like the course of like a year in my spare time, so I feel like this other year I can definitely finish the rest of it and it will be much better than where it is now. I know this first iteration of the game probably still is not going to get super like it's not going to blow up probably because there's definitely been some. I think like the vertical slice versus horizontal slice thing definitely is not like it just hurt the overall. I don't think it hurt the development per se. It kind of hurt the like marketability of it. Maybe I don't know. I can't think of like I think that that's what it was. It was because if I had done the strong vertical slice, it probably would have been easier to release on Steam early access, which is like here's four, and then I could slowly bleed out each character. But then that also gets hard because every character I release has to be that same level of polish that the other ones were.
Yeah.
So like that's going to be an interesting way to see like, oh, here's all the content and now I'm just polishing it if people are like that, or if they like the more like here are three really polished things and then like I keep iterating like one new one. But that would have also been much slower, I think. I think I would probably end up like if I would have did like four characters to a high level of polished, it probably would be another 2 years on early access by the time it'd be launched.
Yeah, and you see that with a lot of games actually, right? Where that's the position they get in, and it's then a super huge climb for every extra bit of content to come out. So yeah, it's like you end up having to commit to it for a much longer time frame than you might really realistically be able to.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I was going to ask, sorry, a couple more things about the Kickstarter there. So, I mean, we've talked about kind of the goal of it. Um, what are you doing in terms of rewards for backers? That's always a huge thing with Kickstarters,
Yeah.
right?
So, and there's probably another slight step back. I'm not doing any physical rewards as a solo person. I don't, and I've always heard horror stories with them. You like a bunch of people get shirts, and then you find out, oh, I got X amount, and I had to use half of it just to buy and ship out all these shirts that people ordered. So I kind of want to avoid headaches like that for one. But the main rewards I'm doing are all digital. So there's obviously, your basic like a thank you and in the credits, and then your copies of the game. And then I'm doing the ability to design an alternate color is one of them. The ability to design an alternate costume, and then finally have an NPC in the background designed off whoever you want or yourself. In a the Mer theme setting. And then I have a few add-ons, just like extra copies, the soundtrack, or most of the soundtrack. I can't do all the soundtrack due to licensing with some of the musicians. And then also was going to do, like, a lot of people are already asking, like, well, what's the hit, startup on this attack and how active, and the is it plus or minus. So I was going to do a little ebook that's like, here's all that frame data illustrated, and try to make that look really nice. So that was another add-on.
All right.
And then the final one, though, is very highly priced, because doing a whole new character of the game based on someone, that's actually twice of the funding goal right now, because would be very big. But I was kind of like, it was one of those, like, I'm curious if anyone will do this kind of thing. I have plans to lower that one later, possibly. So that's a little hint for later, but I'm thinking that over. And then I have another one coming up in October, like, because that was another thing with Kickstarter in general. Like, how do you price your rewards? How do you do all that? It always feels so varied. I feel like I see some games they're only charging like $5 to have a copy, and then some that's just like, you got to put in the $50 tier to get a copy of it even.
Yeah.
That's always a challenge.
Okay. I mean, yeah, but it seems like you're offering things that, like, for for a fan, for someone who's engaged, that's the kind of stuff that you crave, right? Being able to have your own custom color or costume, and then, like, the moonshot of the new character, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's always great, but you're still keeping it accessible to players to be able to get a copy of the game, right? So
Yeah.
it's not like it's prohibitively expensive to support.
No, yeah, the price I have on Kickstarter for a copy of the game is probably going to be very close to the actual launch price.
All right, that makes sense. So I guess finally, about, like, the last thing about Merfight, I guess, is it's very tough to. We've talked about how tough it can be to find success in this sphere. What do you define as success for Merfight?
Success for me is, I release it, and it creates a audience that, not necessarily a big one, but just one that enjoys the game enough and is excited for new content for it and would look forward to a sequel for it. And that, in the hopes that, you know, if I do a sequel or more DLC content or seasons, whichever direction I end up going in that route, it just slowly can build up an audience over time and get bigger and bigger. Um, I know it's never going to probably reach the level of like Street Fighter, where it's, at $1 million tournaments and all that. Like, that'd be great. But that's not really my goal, to get that big with the game. My goal is to just like, I'd rather build a small, passionate audience that really enjoys it than like a massive audience that is angry every time I do an update that they don't like 100% or something. But yeah, for me right now, especially because of some of the ways and approaches, it's mostly just to break even on the cost is kind of my return on investment goal, and then the
Okay.
hope that I build an audience that is excited for my next project or sequel to the game.
All right. And how has the community received Merfight so far?
It's hard to say. I feel there's actually a Reddit thread about Power Rangers Battle for the Grid, and I feel like a lot of the problems with that game that people mention or that they don't like about it. Mostly just I didn't know that game had such simple inputs either, apparently. And I feel like that will probably be a struggle with. I think that will be a struggle with Merfight, and I think there is going to just be the certain people just aren't going to like the theme. I know I've already they're just going to think it's weird or it's just not for them, and that's fine. But I think so it's kind of hard to tell. I think the problem is I haven't really done enough advertising and marketing to really see that reaction quite yet. But I feel like I kind of know where some of the reactions will be, and it's one of those yeah, it's not going to be great to hear that negative feedback in some of those areas, but at the same time, it's it's kind of expected.
Yeah, the fighting game community, they players can be quite fickle when it comes to, I mean, not only gameplay styles, but just art styles, right? I mean, people complained so much about the Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite and the Street Fighter models. Even see it. People complain about the Fantasy Strike models all the time, saying it looks like World of Warcraft as some kind of disparaging remark, right? And it's so it can be tough to find to appeal to everyone, but you can't always do that, right? So I guess you've decided to focus on more um, the theming and trying to pull in the players who would appreciate that, as opposed to the ones who want whatever state of the art bleeding edge stuff.
Yeah, I think that would be a good way to put it. Because well, I think for one, as an indie, there's always that if you're thinking I think for one, if making money and trying to get this big giant huge audience was my number one goal, I don't think I'd probably be doing fighting games as much as I love them, because they are just they're very hard to break into, and there's so much competition, and there's such high expectations is sort of the other thing. Overall, so yeah, so I'm just kind of focusing on it's sort of that I'm making the game that I would want to make or for myself, and then hope that I can attract people with similar taste and who like similar things.
And the indie fighting game audience, as speaking as a member of the indie fighting game audience, we love the stuff that we love a lot, right? So you can definitely find some very passionate players, even in a kind of very niche space, right?
Yeah. Yeah, doing one thing I was hesitant to do a while ago is to make a Discord for my games, and I'm really glad I did, because it allowed me to find some of those really passionate players who have been really motivating and really good at finding things for me to fix or to change, or just even making little suggestions. So I'm really appreciative of those members of the community for sure.
Yeah, would you mind telling me a little bit about your experience with kind of the indie fighting game as well as the indie game dev space, right? It's a small community, but it's extremely supportive. Like what kind of supports do you get out of the scene, right?
Yeah, so the indie game dev scene for fighting games, there's a few discords about it, and it's just really supportive of people sharing each other's games and writing about them, testing them and playing them out, helping share them on social media and stuff. So that's been really nice. And then of course, obviously, there's I'm having this issue with programming XYZ problem. Can someone help me? There's a lot of great things with that for sure. And then in terms of just actual having a Discord for the game itself, you get those members that come and they want to try to pull in more players because they want to try to build that social interaction. They really enjoy the game, so they want to be able to play with other people and have that grow, so that when you add online modes, they actually have people to play with.
Yeah, and your online mode includes rollback netcode, right?
Mm-hmm. It's my own implementation, so I don't ever want to be oh, it's the best. It's not GGPO. It's definitely, it works. I actually was watching someone stream it on Tuesday when I launched the Kickstarter, and it stayed synced. There was obviously a little bit of rollback popping, but nothing horrible. They actually had their ping went up to 400 at one point because they were streaming, and it still stayed synced. So that was nice to see that it didn't just crash.
You get to stress test it now.
Yeah, that is actually the one hope too. I was hoping to get out of the Kickstarter as well, of just hey, here it is, download the demo and try it. Hopefully let me know if the online is working, etc. That's the other challenge of having done such a big demo, is the game is a gig download, And if you want someone to just try something out, that's kind of big.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's like the other not regret, but like other thing I would do differently is be like, oh, here's the demo with just like 2 characters so that it's only maybe like a 200 to 250 meg download instead. It's much faster. Or if I could do like a WebGL build. So it's like, here, you just play it in your browser real quick, just to test it, just to see how it plays gameplay wise. That wouldn't work great for a 3D game, I don't think. But if the game was 2D, I would probably do that in the future. I've actually been contemplating, I'm like, should I bring back Battle High work and try and do more work with that and make like a WebGL version to test online and things like that.
That would be really interesting. I mean, you've seen it with like Tough Love Arena is a web-based fighting game, right? And they've managed to have quite a lot of success with that, where people can you just hit the link and you're there and you can play it and you can try it out, like you said.
Yep. Yeah, I also think that will be an advantage of getting it on Steam too, because Steam, you're not downloading a zip, unzipping it, having that thing pop up that it doesn't recognize the publisher, things like that. Steam is just like, oh, you press play and it starts going once it's installed. So I think that's like it's a big UX user experience thing, that the easier you can make that flow, the better.
So, I mean, you've done a lot of work. Obviously, you've designed the whole thing. You've designed the whole game. You've done a lot of UX work. I mean, you worked on your own GGPO, or sorry, not GGPO. You worked on your own rollback implementation. Is it also a bespoke engine?
It's Unity.
It's Unity. So you created the game in Unity. You're not using anything. There's a lot of like middleware, like Universal Fighting Engine, and such, that a lot of fighting games, especially indie fighting games, have been using. But you haven't decided to do that at all, right? You've just
No, it's the only 2 middleware things I'm using, engine wise, are Unity and then Photon for the networking.
okay.
But yeah, I'm not using Universal Fighting Engine. I just did my own thing. It has a little bit of yeah. Oh, and I'm using a fixed point library, but that was part of something else. That's part of an old Photon product.
Okay, but I guess that's required for proper rollback implementation, right?
Yeah, pretty much to make the game deterministic. I'm using this fixed point library so that, unlike floating point stuff that can sometimes be slightly different on different machines, these numbers should be consistent so that the determinism is always the same. Because that's kind of like the biggest thing. And if you want to try to do a rollback fighting games, it needs to be deterministic.
All right. I mean, were there any other challenges in terms of making a fighting game, either as like just in general or as an indie developer?
Doing it solo is kind of tough because you aren't playing it with another person, so there's a lot of things you miss when you're trying things out. AI is also just tough in general. There is an arcade mode in the game, but the AI is very rudimentary. It's almost actually too hard because it's almost like, I know if you put it on the higher difficulty, it can block pretty much almost anything. So that will be a big part of polish, is just polishing that AI and making that better as well. But yeah, I think doing it solo is pretty tough because you don't have someone to be constantly playing it with, and which is also another good reason why I have the Discord and community, because I could always play with some of them if they're available, and just AI. But that's just more of AI is just not my strongest thing. So that's like another thing in the story mode. I want to try to add extra challenges and things so that even if the AI is not like the smartest or most challenging, it's like, oh, but you have these other goals to do that the AI makes it a little harder to get to.
All right, I like that as like a developing the single player aspect of it. So I guess in order to wrap up here, I mean, is there anything else that you really wanted to say or highlight about Merfight? Like, what are the big takeaways, right?
The big takeaways are, like a lot of other fighting games, I want it to be sort of a long burn. I don't want to just be like, oh, I did this Merfight game and then I never touch it again. It's like, no, I have the cast is launching with 12, but I want to do way more than that over time. And I either, whether that's sequels or new seasons. And though it's ambitious, the big thing I want to do is I want to avoid, I feel, some of the pitfalls of adding new characters in a game that I feel some more modern games have been dealing with. Like, if I add a new character into Merfight, I want to make sure they're properly integrated into the story mode. Also, they just don't add like they don't feel it's just like a tacked on thing that's just like yeah we added them but they don't matter to the story because we did all the story mode content like a couple months or weeks ago. But I think that's the biggest takeaway is it's something that I'm not a 2D pixel artist, which is why I haven't been able to support Battle High as well as I'd want. I still have like an unfinished character for that game I want to do. So I want to support this game, even though I do also want to do other games as well, but I want to support Merfight much longer than my other title and hopefully help it grow. And even if that community stays relatively small, like I'm okay with that as long as they're enjoying the game.
All right, that's amazing. Was there any like final shout outs you wanted to give?
Yeah, I'll give a shout out to Andrea, the developer of Schwarzer Blitz and Motion Sickness. They wrote a really nice article about Merfight. They posted that up on Thursday. They're an indie dev that have been doing some really cool things. And Mohas Gridlock, who's probably one of the most fervent and best members of the community in terms of engagement and excitement for the game. And they are also the winner of our tournament that you participated in as well. So I'd like to give a shout out to them.
Yeah,
for their help.
No, absolutely. And I mean, they didn't they just put together a community combo video as well to celebrate
yeah, they put out that combo video as well.
So that's great. I mean, putting in great work and really trying to show off the community. That's amazing. So where can people find you?
People can find me mostly on Twitter at Mattrified. I would say that's like the number one best place to find me. Yeah, that's it.
All right, keep it simple, and definitely people will have to go check out the Kickstarter. I will make sure to link that when I do all my stuff. So
thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming by and hanging out and talking with me about the game and your history and indie dev stuff.
Sure.
All right. Well, yeah, no, this has been amazing. Thanks. I'm excited. I saw you say something like, yeah, bringing a voice to Merfight, right? And I think that's going to be really fun. I love some of the characterization that you've already done with the characters, and I think you're right. Kind of getting that voice attached to it is going to be really interesting.
Yeah, I think it will help a lot.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, I have an actor friend of mine who I've been talking to him about this interview in the game, and he keeps seeing me play it and stuff. And so he's like, oh, I should take a look at that, and he's like looking at some of the characters, and he's like, this would be really fun. So you're gonna get a message at one point being like, and here's my reel, please.
Yeah, like we're doing in fact, speaking of that, we are doing open. I think we're doing open auditions. So like anyone can really just apply. Like, and I think we're doing it more character focused. I need to talk to Steven to make sure this is 100% accurate. But I think we're going to be doing like here are the characters and what we're kind of looking for them. So reels are great, but I think we are going to do the auditions based on like which character are you trying to voice as well. So
nice. All right.
So if you don't have like a great reel, like one person emailed me and they're like, oh, I don't really have a reel set up yet because I'm kind of new. And I was like, well, you can still just audition, like just try it out for this character when we post the listings and what we're looking for.
Awesome. That's going to be cool. When is the plan for that? Obviously, it's going to happen after the Kickstarter, right?
Yeah, I would say no earlier than mid-October. Probably mid-November, I'd say, is going to be closer to when those auditions open up and when we know, like, okay, what we're getting, what is the budget and like what we're doing. Like, we know the budget, but like, how flexible can we be with it and whatnot?
Yeah, like what can you actually get accomplished with it? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, awesome. Thank you very much, Matt. I don't want to keep you too much longer. You've already given me so much of your time. I really appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess what are you up to for the rest of the day? I guess you're doing the stream again?
I'm not doing. I'm probably gonna do a. I might hop on and play a few games if anyone's available. Usually Sunday. Um, Mohas Gridlock does that. We'll play a few games and he'll stream it on his Twitch. Maybe I'll stream it today on my YouTube or something. That's usually we usually don't do that till around 2. We might do it later today. Um, and then I also have other contract work, which I probably could talk about, but I try not to talk too much about other client work. But I have a meeting. I have a meeting for one of those, which is also a fighting game.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, will be that one will be fun. But I'll talk about that one more publicly later because they're also going to be doing a Kickstarter, but much later down the road than when
Okay.
I am.
Well, hey, I'm keeping my ears open. I'm, I'm always excited. It's funny. I just get like random DMs nowadays where people are just like, "Hey, have you tried this fighting game?" Right? And I'm just like, "Who are you?" And no, I haven't. Thank you. All right, Matt. Well, much appreciated. I will let you go. Yeah, I'll cut the stuff together, and yeah, I'll ping you when I'm ready to get this out. I've got a bit of time. Hopefully, it'll help give a bit of boost to the Kickstarter and to the game. Hopefully, some people will be able to check it out.
Yep. That boost is always important during Kickstarters.
Absolutely, like you said, right? It was like you get the first couple day rush, and then it simmers down, and then there's usually a big boost right at the last day. So
I'm hoping for that big boost at the end for sure.
yeah, yeah. Hey, someone's gonna want that free character or that new character. Just wait. Alrighty. Well, you take care,
You
and
too.
I will talk to you later.
All right. Thanks.
Cheers.